This micro strategy copycat is now going through a short squeeze and absolutely exploding, all while Bitcoin is ripping, baby, and hitting an all-time high. But there's a little wrinkle to this story that makes it oh so interesting, and that is that this MSTR copycat is in Japan, and the Japanese economy is absolutely plummeting. We're going to get into all of this and more today, but first, let's jump in to the coveted Meta Planet, which is now going through a short squeeze, and we are seeing it skyrocket in flight and absolutely taking off. And it seems like the shorts volume of Meta Planet is absolutely insane. It's the most shorted stock in Japan. And it's closed in Japan currently while it's surging on the OTC market in the US. Shorts are getting absolutely destroyed, and they cannot even cover and exit their brutal short position currently. So it seems like these shorts are coming in, and as they say, if you come for the king, you best not miss. So we're seeing all of these shorts now trying to mess around, and they're effing around and finding out real quick what happens when you try to short a company like Bitcoin. And do they really think that there is a quote better winning strategy than what MetaPlanet, MSTR, and the likes above have been doing? It seems like this has not been the case. And this is all amidst while Bitcoin is absolutely ripping and roaring. And I might have jinxed it by hitting that live button because we just dipped under that all-time high. But we also saw Bitcoin get above that not too long ago, where Bitcoin was at that 109,000. So we're seeing now MetaPlanet have to go through somewhat of a short squeeze. So let's go over this because I think this is extremely interesting. This table where the shares borrowed in the 7-day variance, the shorts outstanding are now 25%, and they've been losing a miraculous 12.8%. So it's the most shorted stock in the Japanese market, and it's not even relatively close. Look at this, 117 million stocks borrowed, and this day variance at 13%. And the interesting aspect of all of this is the Japanese market and economy has been shrinking this entire time. We're actually seeing Japan's economy shrinking much more than expected. And this is all coming out amongst the Trump trade wars and the tariffs, the coveted tariffs that everybody's ripping apart, right? But the interesting aspect is the Japanese connection with the United States. Japan is currently the fourth largest economy in the world, but it is an extremely close trading partner with the United States. So Japan's economy contracted at a higher pace than expected in the first quarter of this year, where they were contracting 0.2%, where it was looking to be, it shrank by 0.7%, a lot bigger than that contraction of 0.2%. And I know what you guys are thinking. Okay, we're looking at Bitcoin, seeing everything rip and roar. When you're talking about the difference of 0.5%, that is not a huge deal. But on the other hand, when you're talking about GDPs flipping and beating out expectations in the bad way, over 0.5%, it's absolutely insane, the numbers that we're seeing and the amount of volatility that we are seeing throughout all of this, right? So it's a big in part because of the sluggish exports and what we're seeing. And the exports are slowing as the U.S. tariffs bite, risking a potential of a recession. Now, they are all saying here what we are looking at is the Japanese president, financial minister, is saying the quiet parts out loud. They're the US's biggest creditor, right? So they borrow the most or buy the most of the US debt of any other country in the world, where the Japanese prime minister is now saying that their country's fiscal situation is, quote, in an undoubtedly extremely poor situation, adding worse than Greece's. Look, I'm part Greek, so that's a deep cut to my heart here that they're throwing Greece under the bus, but it's absolutely the situation that is going on and something that needs to be tracked. So when we're seeing Bitcoin start to take off here, and then we're seeing a Bitcoin holding company essentially and Metaplanet be the most shorted stock, and then going through this coveted short squeeze and absolutely taking off, it's something interesting, and it's adding up for extreme volatility. Not too long ago, we saw the Japanese carry trade essentially explode. If you guys don't remember, in August of last year, we saw Japan raise interest rates by 0.25%. And we saw the most volatility in the market since COVID and the 2008 financial crisis. And all Japan did was raise interest rates by 0.25%. So we're seeing massive amounts of volatility that we've honestly never really seen before, especially in Japan. So what does that equate to? Well, it equates to seeing a lot more charts like this, where we're seeing massive amounts of shorts volumes, all skyrocketing it up in an all-time high. And the other things that we're seeing at all-time highs are now 30-year yields. Japan now reaching an all-time high. And these are not the all-time highs that we like to see, right? Because this is where we start to see the result of potentially hitting into a fiscal crisis here. So Japan is honestly in a very, very scary situation here. And now they, of course, want to show me an ad on this. But the U.S. tariffs are honestly hurting this country of Japan much more than they have been hurting in the past. And we're going to continue to see things like this start to come about. But the interesting aspect of all of this is that the Japanese have been shorting Bitcoin, where on the flip side of things, the US showed you guys this the other day. A lot of Americans look at Bitcoin as more of a safe haven aspect. So when there's massive amounts of volatility, when there's a lot of uncertainty in the market, what are you seeing? You're seeing retail in the US, at least theoretically, start to flock towards Bitcoin opposed to flocking towards gold. Well, in the Japanese market, they haven't quite caught up yet to that mindset. They're starting to see more and more of people going anti-Bitcoin, right? We're seeing Japanese investors short a Bitcoin holding company at a rapid rate. And the crazy thing is, you know, when we see Bitcoin start to rip and when we see Bitcoin start to reach new all-time highs, Bitcoin starts to double within a pretty close proximity. It starts to double, I believe, within the next 90 days. So generally speaking, in previous cycles, when Bitcoin hits an all-time high, we start to see that flip and Bitcoin start to rip very, very quickly. So as Warren Buffett says, it's not about timing the market, it's about time in the market, right? So if you look at this chart here, it's very interesting because it shows the returns on the Bitcoin's 10 best days of all time, right? So Bitcoin's average CAGR, or cumulative average growth rate per year, is 125%. A lot of those days came almost in a single day. And in the past 5 years, Bitcoin's CAGR has been 55%. And in 2024, its best day was 52% in a single day. So everybody that is trying to essentially short Metaplanet here, what we're seeing, well, they're coming for the king. And it seems like they're going to get burned. There's a lot more bullish signals that we're going to go into here in a little bit. But the interesting aspect of what we're seeing from these shorts is that they are essentially doubting the capability of Bitcoin. They are doubting some things that we are seeing. And as many of you know, when we start to see Bitcoin rip, we are starting to see it usually is delayed from the global M2 money supply. So if you look at previous cycles, when the M2 money supply starts to rise, there's a little bit of a delay before Bitcoin reaches that peak. Of course, Bitcoin starts to accelerate and rise up, and then we will start to see Bitcoin, reach that all-time high right around when the money supply starts to peak as far as percentage terms. And then when the slowing of the global M2 money supply starts to slow, that's when we see Bitcoin start to come down as well. So what are we seeing now? Well, we're seeing the global M2 money supply start to increase, but Bitcoin is still relatively flat. We haven't even reached that new big all-time high, smoking it past it right yet, but we're starting to see the potential signs here. The signs with green candle is what we're starting to see. So it seems like a lot of people are saying here that all the alts are gone. We've got the chat going perfect range for a bull trap. Everyone thinks it will blow past all times high. It will be highly fought out of this range. So it is pretty interesting. The heat map of the shorts is piled up at 109K. That is an interesting point we've got from JG1982 in the chat here. But I think what we're seeing is a lot of things adding up. A lot of the shorts coming in and shorting different vehicles that get exposure to Bitcoin like Metaplanet. Look, I think not only is Metaplanet, great for the Japanese market, but Bitcoin is the best that you can get, right? So that's why I've paired up with the boys and girls over at the Bitcoin Well, which I think is the best place to buy Bitcoin in the US and Canada. You could go to bitcoinwell.com/greencandle, sign up today, and you will get 500 Wishing Well tokens. On top of that, if you buy your first transaction, you will get another 500 Wishing Well tokens. So that's 2 chances for you to win 1 million sats, and then you set up that recurring buy. Do it today, because Bitcoin is shooting off to the races. So before we get into anything else, let's give you guys some free sats. And maybe I'll do 2 spins today if we've got a lot of people here in the chat, just because of this new all-time high. Boom, 369 sats straight to your dome piece. So hopefully you guys got your Bitcoin Lightning wallets out. If not, you can go to bitcoinwell.com/greencandle, sign up here today. And if you've got 50K smackers, you need to get over half a Bitcoin. You need to do it fast. Book a call with the Bitcoin Well Infinite ASAP like Rocky, and you will get the best white glove service that there is in order to buy Bitcoin on a great exchange with my friends over at the Bitcoin Well. And then on top of that, you need to store it somewhere. So get yourself a Bitbox. You could go to Bitbox02 or Bitbox.Swiss, get the Bitbox 02. I've got mine right here sitting on next to me. You could go there and then you could check out, you could get a hardware wallet as well as a punch plate to get your seed phrase in some steel so it will not be harmed by anything. And you could use promo code GREENCANDLE to get that whole package here. And why am I saying that? Well, because we've got a lot of signs here that the bull market is just getting started. The 8th largest economy in the world just passed this bill to start a Bitcoin strategic reserve. That's right. Right this second, right here, right now, we have lawmakers in the state of Texas that have signed a Bitcoin strategic reserve directly into law. That is absolutely massive, and it is sending a shockwave through markets where other states are going to begin to follow suit. So this means that other economies are going to begin watching, and that we're going to start to see other things start to heat up very, very quickly. In fact, we have the bull run being predicted that it's going to shoot up dramatically this year. And all of the reasoning that they're citing is because of governmental adoption. So the governmental adoption of the eighth largest economy in the world, it's bigger than Italy, folks. So we've got the state of Texas beating out those dirty Italians. Hey, here, gabagool, gabagill. We're beating them. They are the eighth largest economy in the world, larger than those of Russia, Canada, and Italy. All of that from a single state. And what's unique about the state of Texas is that they are one of the leading states and areas in the world for global hash rate. So we're starting to see the state of Texas truly embrace Bitcoin like we've never really seen before. And we even had the report come out from River the other day just showing how much of the US owns Bitcoin, right? So 14% of the United States population now owns Bitcoin. And if you scroll on down here, you could see where the ownership and the mining facilities are. So look at how many headquarters are down deep in the heart of Texas. Well, it seems like a lot of them are, because we're starting to see a shift in global policy. We're starting to see a shift in the mindset of Bitcoin from people all over the globe. And where is that shift starting from? Well, it's starting from not only the top, where we're seeing Donald Trump and his cabinet very much look at Bitcoin as a true, reliable asset that we can see here. But we're also starting to see these states start to FOMO into Bitcoin extremely, extremely fast. So we're going to continue to see this. And as I showed you guys a little bit earlier, majority of Americans really do like Bitcoin, especially when it's coming to something over gold, right? We're starting to see that. So the Texas play is massive, but there's a lot of things that we're starting to see that are going to be adding up for a very, very big cocktail of Bitcoin buying, where I've showed you guys this previously, but I pointed out this prediction from Kraken CFO, who's literally saying that we were going to see more than 10,000 publicly traded companies that will own Bitcoin in the next few years. And what has he been saying? Well, he's been saying, how do you justify not having Bitcoin on your balance sheet? Look at the date of this article here, folks. December 29th, 2020. So he's been banging the drum for quite some time, and we've only got 108 publicly traded companies currently having Bitcoin on the balance sheet. So what does that mean? That means we're going to see a 99x in number of companies, and these guys are the big dogs. The big dogs puffing out their chest, barking at everybody, saying, hey, we are buying Bitcoin, and that's what we're going to continue to see here. So I think that this is going to be interesting, and I think that, this development here of seeing 10,000 publicly traded companies absolutely explode is something that we're gonna have to keep a very, very close eye on, because as the Bitcoin price is now crashing while I'm doing this down to 106,000, just under that 107 mark, we're seeing the M2 money supply start to increase, right? We're seeing a lot of writing on the wall. We're seeing the industry breakdown of more and more of Bitcoin start to get mined in the US. 36% of the global hash rate is now in the US. And we're seeing the state of Texas now fully embrace Bitcoin like something we really haven't seen before. So 10,000 of these publicly traded companies are going to come on, and to everyone and that's a big part because of Michael Saylor. We're seeing that he owns already over 500,000 Bitcoin, and that's going to continue to trick up, right? MSTR is not going to stop buying Bitcoin. And what we're seeing is other companies that get involved and start buying Bitcoin. Well, see this chart here, see the amount of short volume go, and then they see them come roaring back. So these companies and these states are starting to see the benefit of holding Bitcoin on the balance sheet and continuing to see that Bitcoin balance grow. Now, if you look at it based on other cycles, right? You see Bitcoin, you see the total return on these next best 10 days. We're going to start to see a lot more of these 10 days start to come alive, I think, because we're starting to see this volatility of Bitcoin shoot up. We're starting to see big money start to come in. We're starting to see governments start to come in. And what did this River report cite as the number one reason for this cycle being different? Well, it's because of governmental adoption and the US then becoming dominant in Bitcoin, right? That's their whole premise of this report, is that the US is becoming dominant in Bitcoin because its ownership of the Bitcoin supply is around 40%. The US share of nation state Bitcoin holdings is 65%. The market share of crypto, or of corporate Bitcoin holdings is 94, almost 95%. 70% of US market share of Bitcoin's venture funding is from the US. The US market share of spot ETFs is nearly 80%, and 36% of the overall global hash rate is sitting here in the land of the free, the home of the brave. So what we're seeing in the United States is just a global embracement of Bitcoin that is not really catching on anywhere else. So you might ask yourself, all right, why is that? Why is the US embracing Bitcoin? They've got the global reserve currency in the dollar. Well, the US is very much into the land of the entrepreneur, starting to take responsibility of everything and, really becoming your quote own bank and moving forward in that respect. And so the US market is seemingly primed for something like this. And I think it's going to continue to shoot in that direction. But you can really utilize the true power of Bitcoin by really being your own bank and continuing to, take that self-ownership, and that includes self-custody. Now, I know that could be a daunting task. That's why I've partnered over with my friends over at the Bitcoin Way. Now, I know I've been told I've been looked like a funeral director in this picture, but I'm just dressed up for the death of fiat here, folks, because Bitcoin's going on every balance sheet. Bitcoin is about to take over. So if you are looking for a one-stop shop for self-sovereignty services, go over to thebitcoinway.com/greencandle. Those guys will help you out. They will give you a free 30-minute consultation. You can get a Plan B passport. You can get help making sure your computer is wiped clean of any potential viruses or threats before you move your private keys on over. And they will help you with everything. They won't even touch any of your private keys, do anything like that. So be sure to go to thebitcoinway.com/greencandle, because that is where you can find out where your friends in Bitcoin are all holding everything safely. And on top of that, I love to meet you guys in person. So come to the Bitcoin kickoff party here in literally less than a week. Go to the bitcoinkickoffparty.com. You guys go buy yourself a ticket. You can pay in Bitcoin if you like. It's at a discount today because Bitcoin's ripping and roaring. We've got Elvis. I've got a podcast booth. We've got a bunch of different crazy stuff here going. But you got to do it, and you got to do it quickly. You know why, folks? Because America's share of Bitcoin is really starting to rip and roar here. We've got a lot of people in the chat blowing it up here saying, hey, MSTR is too volatile. Bitcoin itself is volatile enough. Well, there's actually a way you can play on it a little bit. And the volatility, there is MSTY, which is an ETF that plays on the volatility of MSTR, which is, a more volatile thing than Bitcoin, as you are pointing out here. But look, that's not financial advice. You guys do your own research. And as MC Chili is saying, yes, that is if you are thinking in Bitcoin or in fiat extent of Bitcoin. MSTR is pathetic, but maybe Taylor needs to lay off the all-time high so some of us can retire. Well, what we're saying, you're looking at the daily movements here, right? you're not looking at what is the writing on the wall. You're not seeing all these execs, right? If you're looking at everything and judging all of these things on a daily movement, you're never going to be satisfied with all of this, right? Because we're seeing a lot of bullish signals here today. I mean, we're seeing a Bitcoin hit that all-time high. 250K seems to be inevitable for this year. And, we're starting to see this really shoot up. And, Bitcoin is not volatile because it continues to just go and chug along, right? We know how much Bitcoin is going to be put out here on a daily basis. So these Texas lawmakers now putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet and continuing to put everything out there, and then we have a bunch of different, people, the bears out here like Peter Schiff, looking at things like, hey, what happens if the Fed decides to cut, right? Because we've been talking about the global M2 money supply. We've been talking about the potential of this, but what's going to happen in the next Fed meeting? Everybody likes to speculate whether or not the Fed is going to cut interest rates. I just like to look at the odds here. So the CME group is great because they tell you basically the percent chance based on a various of factors as to whether or not the Fed's going to cut interest rates. And it's hard to tell, but this big old bar graph on the right is saying that there's a 94.7% chance that the Fed stays put and there is no change, and only a 5.3% chance that the Fed cuts by 25 basis points. So what does that tell you, folks? Jay Powell is going to keep his foot down and make sure that he keeps everything at a very high rate. So this global M2 supply, why are we starting to see it increase, you might ask? Well, everyone around the globe is cutting interest rates but Jerome Powell. So when Jerome Powell decides to do that, that's when all bets are off. We're going to start to see that here come soon because there are some cracks in the overall market that are going to show up here pretty soon. We've got a lot of you guys in the chat here, so I appreciate you guys coming on. We're talking a lot about the potential cracks that we're seeing and the volatility that we're seeing in different markets that is going to be leaking over into the United States. And I'm going to keep going and ripping on this, so make sure you slap that subscribe button and hit the bell notification so you know when I am going to go live, because I'm giving out free sats. Smoke the like Cheech and Chong as well, because we're seeing a short squeeze like we haven't seen in any other industry, any other market going on right now. Because, as I was saying, the Fed is not going to cut interest rates, but what can force them to cut these interest rates is other economies around the world start to collapse. And these other economies are closely connected to the United States. So if we look at the United States connection with Japan, the economic is very, very close, right? The economic ties, they have a strong relationship, but it's not a free trade agreement or anything else, right? Japan is showing a quote economic recession that they're comparing it to Greece right now. And look, Greece was in a terrible place, but there is no comprehensive free trade agreement between the Japanese market and the United States. So we're seeing massive amounts of volatility. And if you guys remember, like I stated a little bit earlier, the Japanese carry trade sent shockwaves through the market not too long ago. We saw the Japanese carry trade essentially look at the way that the United States is just basically conducting and opening up these different things. We're having so many different avenues now start to open and unleash itself to Bitcoin. So I think that we're going to continue to see this Down Under Blues is saying his Bitcoin is getting too expensive for his and his $25 DCA buys. Make sure you set that up through Bitcoin Well, so it's going straight to cold storage. But I appreciate you guys all joining me. I dropped a great video on the hackers from Bitcoin or from Coinbase. Make sure you guys go all and check out that video here ASAP, like Rocky. And smoke the like Cheech and Chong. Hit the subscribe button. Tell a friend to tell a friend. And I'll catch you guys all at the next one.